This is the second part of the Communist Manifesto, Proletarians and Communists. I have to apologize. First off, my kitty, Lin Meow, has a nasty ear infection, so they may make her an appearance. I'm going to keep going on. Second off, I've worked pretty heavily today, and so I'm somewhat tired, but nevertheless, what are proletarians, or what are communists but proletarians turned radical? So first off, in this section, Marx talks about the relationship, or the relation of communists to proletarians, and what he says, communists don't have anything that separates their interests beyond the proletarians of workers' parties. Now, this is really important. He continuously says workers' parties, workers' parties, workers' parties. And what especially those of you in the United States don't understand is most nations that pretend to practice democracy have a representative system in which the votes are represented in the legislature, or however, even at this time they were represented. The United States does not have a representative electoral system. So with that in mind, when he talks about the relationship of communists to the proletariat, he says that communists don't have a separate interest beyond the proletariat or workers' parties. And it's very important to make it clear what he means by workers' parties. There are all sorts of various workers' parties in Europe. There were at the time. There were no workers' parties in arguably the Farm Labor Party or the Socialist Party, but not really, because the United States has the Republicans and Democrats, which both serve the interests of the bourgeoisie, the capitalists. But that's my opinion. Let's get back to Marx. I'm just trying to give some qualification to what he's saying. The communists' main task in relation to the proletariat is twofold. One, they have to bring the concerns of the international proletariat to the forefront. And this means it's not enough just to say, oh man, work sucks. Those darn immigrants are taking our jobs. No, the point is, as communists, we're supposed to look at all workers everywhere and bring the international concern of workers to the forefront. And also, they represent the movement as a whole rather than the particular moment of struggle. A good example of this is the 8-hour workday. That was a very particular moment, which was brought about by communists all across the world, primarily Europe and the United States, which was brought about by May Day, which was caused by the police murdering a bunch of anarchists. The point was, and this is a bit ahistorical, the point was, it wasn't the 8-hour workday and then we're done. It's that we represent the movement as a whole, and we represent it as a whole rather than this particular struggle. That doesn't mean we don't represent particular struggles, but we have to represent it as a whole. In addition, communists are the most advanced elements of the proletariat that can drive forward the movement, not because of principles or ideas, but because they actually do it. And this is very, very difficult to parse out. I mean, all you have to do is look at Engels' history, and the question of whether Engels, the question of whether Engels is a proletarian is done. He's not. But as a communist, he attempted to further the proletarian cause as much as he could. So, in any case, well, what is the cause? Communists seek to abolish private property. And in fact, Marx spends great lengths talking about how various properties were abolished throughout history. He talks about how feudal property was abolished by the capitalists and how we now need to abolish capitalist property as communists. And it's important that property is not earned property because capitalism destroys small property owners. You think of how many, oh, you got to support the mom and pop shops. It doesn't matter. They're going to be destroyed by capitalism. I'm sorry, your Etsy account is not going to topple Amazon. And that's really important to note. Also, wage labor does not create property for the worker, but creates capital for the capitalist. That means the job that every proletarian, every wage laborer works doesn't ultimately create more for them. When I go to my job, I don't create more capital for me. Rather, I create capital for the people and investment banks that own the business that I work for. So it's very important to note capital isn't simply private property, but social property. And so the role of labor is social. I don't know about the rest of you, but where I work, it's social. We all have various jobs and we all do them. But, Marx says, under capitalism, labor creates capital for the capitalists. We all do our jobs and we all eke out a living, such as it is. But at the end of the day, it ultimately creates capital for the capitalists. It creates, not to jump the gun and get into wage labor and capital here, but it creates profit. Profit is then used and becomes capital. What do I get? I get the ability to pay my rent, feed myself, and continue to live for another day, hopefully. Under communism, capital as a means of production would help serve human lives. Now, this is an ongoing problem that Marx has, and it doesn't help that he basically ran up against a deadline, the due date of his paper, and he often kind of mixes what he means by capital in the sense that he means social capital as a generative force could be used for the people, but he definitely means capital as owned by the capitalists, working for the capitalists, serving the capitalist class. So, in addition, he says the communists seek to abolish numerous aspects of society. First off, communists seek to abolish freedom. So next time you run into a conservative who's like, you hate our freedom, you say, yep, I sure do. What freedom do we hate? The freedom that abolished is the freedom to buy and sell. And the freedom abolished is the freedom to be part of the bourgeoisie. It's not to say that there will not be anything that can be bought or sold under communism. But you'll often hear, oh, we need free markets. But those free markets are, first off, never free. And in fact, what it does is it serves to help the capitalist class against all other classes. Next, they say communists seek to abolish culture. Capitalists say people won't work without capitalism, but that's absolutely ridiculous. they're saying individuals won't exist without capitalism. If that was true, then people wouldn't work anyway, because in fact the people working the most get the least, and the people who don't work at all get the most. All you have to do is look at Paris Hilton and Elon Musk as your capitalist exemplars, that is to say, your images of capital, and look at what work they do, but instead what they do is hire people to do the work for them. And so for the proletarian, the entire intellectual, I want to say milieu, but the entire intellectual attitude changes, and it changes from how do I as an individual realize myself into simply becoming part of the machine. Also, it's a level that communists want to abolish the family. The bourgeois family is already based on property relationships. And keep in mind, Marx is writing in 1848, 47, 48. And in that case, very much so, it was a question of, for the rich people, oh, who is my daughter going to marry? How does that affect our property, etc., etc. And to the vast majority of humanity at the time, it didn't matter at all. So abolishing the family didn't really change any of those relationships. It was simply what it was. And in addition, communists wanted to abolish exploitation of children by their parents. If you'll remember, in 1848, it was not unusual for children to be sent to mines, sent to factories, work to bring in money for the family, which is not to say that the parents used their children and just sat back and lived large. No, the parents were also working. But communists were against that. And that is clearly they would want to abolish that sort of relationship. In addition, and this is sadly still topical, communists want to replace homeschool with social school. And it's really important that Marx draws this point. Where do people object, oh, how dare you say I not be able to homeschool my children? Where do you think you get your ideas from? You get them from society. So the question is not whether I should socially school my children by sending them to school, as opposed to being a good parent and raising them at home. The question is, what sort of social milieu are you raising them in? One says that they should be raised in social aspects, in a social manner, in a social way, which is to say involving multiple people, multiple different ways. And one is saying we should control them individually, which itself is a social construct. In addition, communists want to replace the exploitation of women, which goes by the dual names of prostitution and marriage. At this time, women were not treated, well, even today, women are not treated super well. And if at the time, if you were a rich woman, you could expect to be married off for dowry and social relations. All you have to do is look at the incestuous Habsburg family. Or you were just given away just as like, well, you're not our problem now. So it doesn't make sense to be aggravated or incensed that communists believed at this time against the institution of marriage. Communists want to abolish the countries and nations. Absolutely. This is a key point, which will become very, very important later. But what Marx says is the working class have no real nation and must constitute themselves as a nation against the bourgeois concept of nation. That means what you have to understand, or what the proletariat, the workers, have to understand, is it is the workers against the rich. And it doesn't matter where you draw an arbitrary national border. That's the real difference between the two. In addition, commerce and trade continues to degrade and destroy any national characteristics in favor of a world market. This is the thing. You may hate Mexicans, you may hate the Chinese, you may hate the Indians. I'm guessing probably they're on an iPhone just like you are. These commodities, the force of capitalism begins to break down these characteristics, and the capitalist song is, oh, now we're all connected. But in fact, we're not connected. We're not connected in a real substantive way. And the continual emphasis and pushing on this, one only has to look at the Trump rally, where people want to take America back. What America? In what way? From who? How? How do they organize? Facebook? The internet? That's the same thing that connects all of us. So there you go. So the abolition of the exploitation of individual by individual will also help end the exploitation by nation, of nation by nation. In addition, communists want to abolish various philosophies, religions, and ideologies. Individual consciousness constantly changes in regards to material conditions. One only has to look at how much respect you have for any king or queen in your country, and there's some very good punk songs about the Queen of England, which I highly recommend you look up. That would be, people would be murdered for that. But honestly, at this point, it fundamentally changes. That we recognize the king, queen, prince, whatever, are people just like all of us, which means they've lost their glow of aristocracy. In addition, the continuing conditions of existence generating new ideas rather than new ideas only changing ideas, is that the point is, the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, say, oh, well, we interpreted, so under feudalism there was God, and that was all good, and religion, and that was all good, but we found something better through the Enlightenment, and so we're putting an end to all those weird, forcible religious ideas into something more concrete. All that communists are saying is, yes, the ideas are themselves subject to social mores and social influence. This was a big deal at the time because, being a communist meant you were an atheist and blah, 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 despite the fact it was founded by religious people. But regardless, that's one of the accusations at the time. And this is a clear response. No, we're not saying, death to all old ideas, but rather new ideas replace older ideas. In addition, Marx talks about how the communists and proletarians must win a victory against the capitalists. And how he says that is they must disrupt and continue to make advances of private property. And he actually goes on to list 10 very humble things at that time in which they make inroads against private property. And he concludes with the fact that political power is used by one class to suppress another, and this is why the proletariat must form themselves as a class. And that means we can't simply be individuals struggling. My view of this, not necessarily Marx's view, although I think it is also Marx's view, is we cannot simply be individuals struggling against X, Y, or Z, but in fact, we need to view other workers, other proletarians as part of our same class. And a win for them is a win for us. And, that's what he says.